Game on.
We are on, I think.
Got the green light.
Yeah. We're good. Okay. Clint, where are you from?
I'm basically from Northwest Arkansas.
Clint, where are you specifically from?
I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Via. And then.
No, I'm Lancaster, Pennsylvania to Northwest Arkansas.
Yep.
Moved here at about 9 years old. So hence I'm really from here. Grew up here, went to high school in Springdale, and graduated from the University of Arkansas.
When you were a kid in Springdale fixing to go to college, why did you go to the University of Arkansas?
I got tricked by my parents that staying in state would be a good thing to do for the first year.
Yeah, and then you were just there already.
And it worked out great. The university was really developing at that time, and was really the first program to have a economics program that was focused on international, and that was really what I was interested in anyway. And so, fate being what it is, it turned out really for the best.
And your major was econ?
My major was econ with a focus on Russian studies.
And you speak Russian?
I can't say that I speak Russian anymore, but at one time I did speak Russian.
And when you decided you needed to learn to speak Russian, what were you thinking?
Well, I was trying to determine, did I want to speak Chinese or Russian? And China seemed like the thing to do, but I figured everybody else was going to speak Chinese. And so my particular interest was in high school and junior high with Russian literature, and I really wanted to read literature in Russian. Plus in economics, I was really focusing on transitional economy, and at that time, which was the early 90s, we had a living experiment that was really around what would be the institutions and the practices, what would be the failures that we would see coming from that transition. And so I did my senior year actually in Russia, and had an opportunity to see that firsthand and experience what was going on there.
And then what? So you graduate college, you've spent a year in Russia.
My wife, or my wife now, girlfriend at the time, said there is no way that I can live here. And so you can imagine coming back to Northwest Arkansas at that time, having a degree in economics and effectively speaking Russian and knowing Russian literature, everybody wanted to hire that guy.
Everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. High demand.
High demand.
Yes.
And so what'd you do?
I decided to take up golf.
Yep.
I thought
As one
that
does.
a summer of golf would be important in my career. And I met some guys that were in the early phases of what's now called the vendor community, servicing Walmart, that led to a job in analytics, which was essentially, you're obviously a math guy, you know some stuff, I'm not sure what to do with you, but I feel like hiring you would be the right thing to do, and we'll figure it out.
We like that you speak Russian, and there you go.
Spasibo большое.
Yeah, sure. So you're an analyst, you're working on vendor stuff. What does that really mean that you're doing? You're sitting at a computer doing what?
So at that time, there was really basic data analytics. It wasn't what it is today. And this idea of a collaborative supply chain was just starting to emerge. How could you transform these bits of data into actionable intelligence in the market? And that actually really set up well for me. And it was at the beginning, so it really hadn't been done. And at that time, you didn't have AWS, you didn't have cloud-based storage, you didn't have the ability for thousands of people to look at this data. Walmart was by far the largest private database globally.
Yeah.
And the ability to handle that data was challenging. You didn't even have Access database back then, right? You had to use Paradox or some other thing.
SAS.
Excel limited out at like 10,000 rows.
Yeah.
It was a different world back then.
Yeah, I remember.
So it was really about finding some ways to leverage this data that we had in some context that was either meaningful for moving cases of product at the shelf and or finding upstream ways to use it with the actual parent company, who really didn't know what to do with this data. They had no idea how it could be utilized.
So in essence, the servicing business sat between people who made stuff and the retailer who was going to sell the stuff that those people made. Yeah.
Totally, and you had this overarching idea, which I think needs to be mentioned. Well before his time, Mr. Sam, introduced this idea of, if you give your partners access to information, they will find things to do with that data that you would have never expected, and will improve the business. And this doesn't exist without that mentality.
Right.
Really, none of it probably exists without that mentality, because it was the first time that those sorts of concepts were put into practice. They were more than notional for the first time.
Right. And now we think about and talk about open source and exposed hooks for people to build things onto, and that none of that stuff was even a dream then. I mean, it was
I don't think so.
stuff sitting on a server somewhere that you had to go there and run these. I mean, that's my memory.
Our first machine, the first machine that I worked on for Retail Link, was hardwired to Walmart. They sent you a machine, and it was connected specifically to their network, and without that machine you couldn't do anything. That was
Right.
sort of phase one.
Terminals, right?
Terminals.
Yeah. In hospitals we had terminals, right? There were these big servers and terminals, and it was horrible. I think these guys have never experienced terminal world, but it was a pretty bad deal.
Yeah.
So, that company was called what?
Golden Books.
And then
The
what?
little kitty books with the golden stripes.
Yes.
Then I transitioned to a company called the Johnson & Johnson, a little small company you might have heard of.
A tiny one.
And from there, I went on to the Scott's company, which was Miracle Grow, Roundup, that sort of thing. Moved over to a kitchen products company called World Kitchen, then ConAgra, and then my glamorous life as an entrepreneur.
And in those steps, this sort of analytic function was part of what you did, sort of all the way along. Yeah.
What I learned after about a year in the position was I started to understand all the things I'm now talking about, that you had data and you had an ability to create insight, but most importantly, you had an opportunity to transform business decisions through the lens of data. And that was probably my early discovery that really helped me. That helped me be very successful in the analytics role, but it helped me also from a management perspective as I started to move cross-functionally into, I ran demand planning, I ran customer service, I worked on network optimization, even though that wasn't really my background, because I was really good at creating this lens to look through and reevaluate current business process. And that made me kind of an internal consultant by being able to, use this lens. And that really, if I had to give myself kind of what was the mechanisms that allowed me to do what I did, it was really understanding that pretty early on. That's what I do today, by the way.
Yeah, so that's the point that we're at in our process. So in the project design process that they're using from IDEO, there's sort of the discovery interview phase, going out and collecting data, and then there's a meaning making step. So we're at the point of starting to take all of these things. So the next assignment that they have is making insight statements. So basically putting all the bits of things that they learned from their discovery interviews and pulling that together. And that's sort of your job. That's what you do as a profession, is make meaning sit as the translator and make meaning. But so when you're trying to sort of introduce someone to this world, when you've got somebody who's got a product and wants to come into this space, what's the first thing that you sort of say as a disclaimer? Do you often run into people who are totally naive to the process, or is it usually people who've kind of been there and done that?
Well, in our business, we really have clients at all levels, right? And so we have larger companies who we're doing certain work for, but we will have those smaller companies who it was some people who had a really creative idea and maybe got some traction and it's starting to make a name. And so those are somewhat different questions. What you will find that's in common to your point though is people are generally in love with whatever it is that they're bringing you. And they often, you and I were talking earlier about product market fit, they don't often understand is that 1% of the population or 75% of the population. And that just because they have passion for it and all of this experience around it, that doesn't mean that it's going to resonate in and of itself with a given buyer. Right. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
And so it's really about, frankly, it's about giving them perspective is usually the first conversation. It's understanding where are they coming from, what are the 5 major assumptions that they've made, and helping them to understand there might be a different side to the coin on each one of those 5.
Sure. So when you got ready to go out on your own, when you were like, tired of working for the man, what was that process? How did that happen?
Well, it was a pretty easy decision for me because I'd never said that. I kind of liked working for the man. It had been pretty good to me, and so it was good. And but I realized my job got relocated, and so we were not going to leave. We were not moving to Boise, Idaho, and it just was in the cards. And so rather than sort of go through that a number of times, which seemed likely, we decided to try creating something.
Yeah.
And so that really became a process of, going through and evaluating, throwing all your ideas up on a board. I use a quadrant analysis for basically everything in life, and so for me it was level of complexity. What would I be able to contribute to it my own self versus having to have other people do? How much was it going to cost to actually be able to do it? And what was size of prize? And try to narrow those 4 quadrants down to come up with what are the 3 or 4 things that are exciting enough to go do, have a big enough payoff, and that I can start without spending any money.
Yeah. Well, it worked.
Well, remains to be seen, but it's working. Let's say that.
It's working.
Yeah.
So what was the first iteration of that? Right. So things evolve, right? Whatever you thought you were going to do and what you do now is probably slightly different. What did thing 1 look like?
Well, I started 3 things at one time.
As one does.
And just to minimize risk, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so, all I had was elbow grease at the time. And so I started working on those 3 things. And one of the 3 was basically what we have today, which is a retail brokerage, which is in some form or fashion, I had either done it or been responsible for it for my entire career. And so it was kind of like, hey, I know how to do this. I can go do this. This will generate revenue. And so I should spin that up. And then I'll work on the 2 other ideas that will be way more successful than this one. And one of those was in the same space, but essentially trying to create a platform to enable a more educated approach to dealing with outside sales and really outside resources. We sort of believed that outsourcing would be important in professional services. And so we thought, hey, we can create a mechanism to be able to do that. And it was interesting, but we could never figure out, we never really got product market fit. We were pretty early. And frankly, we could never figure out a sustainable revenue model.
Yeah. It's funny how that happens.
And I guess probably the point that you're getting at is, so why did this actually happen? And so our company really started hitting a lot of base hits from the beginning. And at a certain point, you've got to follow success. You got to follow what's winning and iterate off of that. And so that's what we did. And we really doubled down on this business and tried to take it from just doing what others had done and expanding it out, rethinking it, reimagining what it could be. Because you want to do something that you're passionate about is creating a difference, and that's really how we got where we are today.
So this business is called Legacy. We've talked a little bit about like naming and branding. How did that happen?
Well, the company that I actually founded was called #OnShelf. If you are a Saturday Night Live fan, you will remember JT and
Yeah.
who's the other late night guy?
Yeah.
Not Kimmel, but anyway, they had the whole skit with #this, #that, #the other. And it turns out that most of the decision makers in our business were not Saturday Night Live fans. And had a tendency to think of it as the pound sign.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a little too clever. And then hashtag doesn't actually work with anything because of what it actually does. So it screws up every database that is not trying to use a hash for search.
Right.
So it's a real problem. So at a certain point, we merged with the original Legacy Retail and decided that that was a far better naming convention and resonated more with our clients. And because we were brick and mortar focused, it's called Legacy Retail. And so it just had a natural, lended itself naturally to that business.
Yeah. So this is, you've made the point for me, but this thing about naming is like, it's the same about, you know, you have to have a certain passion for what you do, you have to be attached to it, and also you have to be not that attached to it so that you can do what works. And like, you're really attached to a name, you're like, this is the best name ever, this is gonna be rad, and then it doesn't work. So you have to be ready to like let it go and go with something that works. And even if it's not your favorite thing, if it works, it works. And you gotta keep going with that.
As an entrepreneur, you can't really have many sacred cows.
That's right.
Right? And beliefs will kill you.
I think that's right. I think like something that you're overly attached to, right? Maybe it's the good Buddhist in me, but like you can't get super attached to much of anything, because if you do, that will necessarily be the thing that the business forces you to like, or that's my own personal experience, forces you to let go of. Like the things that I was most certain like needed to be there in my own business were the things that like almost immediately it was like, yeah, you can't do that.
That's right, because they are not fitting the fact pattern.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
They are warping whatever it is that you're trying to do. And I mean, I personally believe that's what causes many, many business failures. Whether the name is the most important thing or not, I think having a name that is well thought through, that you can discuss, is really just that, is about being well thought out. And things change, circumstances change, right? They change in big companies, but you don't notice them as much because just the overall mass of the enterprise. But when you're 3 or 4 people that are working, that change is significant. And it can really, to your point, I mean, it can absolutely obliterate your business.
Totally. Yeah. So, the students have been given the link to the 2010 40 Under 40, and look at you now.
Unrecognizable, literally.
Right. So, I don't know what year you graduated college, but like thinking about where they are now as undergrads, right? With the world as their oyster, and then, you know, you'd made it big time when you were like 40 Under 40.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And now, like, what do you wish you had known when you were, you know, 21 and deciding what to do with life? And
Well, this is an entrepreneurial class, right?
it is, yeah.
And so I would just say probably everyone in this class is light years ahead of me in terms of awareness. I never really aspired to be an entrepreneur or a business owner. I didn't understand the opportunities and the freedom that come from that. Now there's, as everything has a different side, there is the other side to it, but that is largely the same coin no matter where you're at. But the opportunity that exists in this world, I wish that I had had a better insight to. I also wish that I'd had a little bit more around sort of the fundamentals of thinking about growing an organization or pulling something out of the earth. Like, what does that actually mean? Because there's a lot of parts of that that are much more like plumbing
Yeah.
than they are architecture.
Yeah.
And in this world, my experience has been both. And so I was blind to the opportunity, and B, I really did not have an appreciation for what successfully building a company looks like. And I didn't acquire that personally until probably 42 or 43. Because until you do it or you get exposed to that, it's really very, very difficult to fully appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually aspired to always be somebody else's employee because my mom is a dentist and she ran her own practice and it looked like hell on earth to me. And I was like, I just want to work for someone who's just gonna like pay me a paycheck.
Right, yeah.
And like, I do not want to have to like deal with anybody's sick kid or like any HR issues ever. And at the end of the day, the thing that kept me from like staying on that path as an academic was just the sheer frustration of like problems that I saw that I felt like needed to be solved and no one was solving them. And it was just that. It was just like, why doesn't this exist?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, there was nobody else who was going to make it exist, and I couldn't take it.
You were compelled to.
I was compelled, right? And I find that now that I've done it once, I'm compelled in a zillion different directions. I get why people have that like serial entrepreneur thing of like, oh, this is why it's better to like start your own thing and do your own thing, because then the creative aspect of being able to make what you want appear is there versus, you know, I'm stuck in this structure and they won't do what I tell them to do.
Right, right. Of course, though, the flip side of that is that, and I think this is the thing that I can say that I could appreciate from my own experience is, don't underestimate what it takes to get it done.
No.
And
yeah,
don't
really
underestimate the challenge in doing that, right? In the big corporation, you have the lever. The question is, will anyone let you use it?
Right.
Whereas in this world, you want to use the lever, but you can't afford to buy one.
Right.
And so that really is the challenge, I think, that exists as you think about, am I going to build something or not?
Yeah. And I think that same thing even in your own business exists when you get to that, like, do I build it or do I outsource? That outsource decision is like, okay, well, I could create my own data management software, or I could use some SaaS thing that's like $20 a month.
That's right.
And it's not perfect and it doesn't do everything I want, but these people already got it figured out.
We still do that in different parts of our businesses. As we start to think about, we're going to go out and win a particular part of the market or develop a new vertical, we tend to really think about, you know, how do we test that in a low-cost way? I'm sure you guys are talking about MVPs and things of that nature. You know, we employ that. We're big on test and learn. We're big about going and getting experience. And so, you know, we'll rent a platform if that's what's necessary. We'll make strategic investments, as we've done, to get access to this tech stack without having to go spend $5 million to build it. We get a much cheaper way of getting a seat at the table in a strategic way, and that can be valuable. At other times, if that is where you define you're going to win, you might decide it would be important to actually own that if that's one of your critical success factors.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Is that fair?
Totally. So, now that it's legacy, what do you guys do around here? Like, okay, retail brokerage, got it. But what actual verticals do you play in? What have you tried that you hated and you don't do anymore? You know, what's going on around here?
We really focus on two particular areas. And so our goal is to serve our clients wherever product sales take place. And so we can think of it as total retail, whether that's direct to consumer, whether that's e-commerce, whether that is brick and mortar. We have a very agnostic view of that. And our job is to eliminate friction from the production of the product through to customer success and ultimately shoppers buying it. And so that's where we really live. Our typical manufacturer or brand partner is someone who does great product innovation. They know what it takes to be successful in the supply chain. They know how to manufacture. They fundamentally operate their business as well. Our job is that next step, which maybe they do or maybe they don't do well. And so your mention of outsourcing or sort of renting a service, that's really where we fit in. So we're for companies who want the best talent, to both give them insight on how to run their business from the parts that we're responsible for, all the way through actually going out and selling that product and promoting that product, and in the case of e-commerce and direct-to-consumer, being able to transact that for them, whether that's taking a credit card in DTC, or that is being able to keyword 300 words per minute on Amazon. That is our job, to encapsulate all of those services, and they don't have to hire 5 different people or 15 different people to go do that. We give them the opportunity for fractional ownership.
Cool. And what do you want to do that you haven't done?
I think what we really want to do that we haven't done is to find that product market fit on the platform side.
Yeah.
And so right now, we largely view ourselves as a management consulting firm that provides the services that we would recommend. And that's a little bit unique, and that's a great space for us to be in.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think for us, if we can figure it out, or someone else figures it out, is to be able to actually own that infrastructure and be able to provide a one-stop shop for our customers. So that means being able to handle their warehousing, that means being able to handle their pick pack, that means being able to have a very low labor cost to serve on the software side of that, whether that's advertising, shipping, even inbound compliance.
Yeah.
And I think figuring out and then building our software model is both what will create a strategic moat for us, and also would just be, fucking killer to go do.
Tell them what a strategic mode is.
So as you're building your business, you might want to consider the idea of, what can I do that would be very hard for others to replicate, or very difficult, or would create its own scale or network efficiency, for lack of a better word, something that the better you get at it and the more people that you have in it, it becomes inherently more difficult to come take your business, because you're driving your costs down over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so that's what we would think of it as. Talent's tough on that. Ideas are tough on that, right?
Yeah.
You really have to have some sort of network scale,
Yeah.
right? Whether that's digital or that's in the real world, that feeds itself.
And how much of your business is digital and how much of it's in the real world? So we're living in the time of COVID, we are not sitting in the classroom with them. I would normally drag you to Fayetteville and we would all sit together in a classroom and they would ask you questions, but their lives have shifted almost entirely to this online environment. So as your sort of brick and mortar clients in Walmart retail business, has online components itself, and then you have completely online transactions.
Yeah, I mean, for us, our bulk of our business is thinking. That's really what we do. And so that might have been 95% pre-COVID, but now it's Zoom meetings with the buyer instead of going and sitting down. And so, where having our address was somewhat valuable before, it's now, I'm not gonna say it's not worth anything, but it's not that meaningful.
Yeah.
And we're having to adapt to a world where your value proposition is far more meaningful than where you sit. And we built for that. That's one of the things we were very clear about, going back to your original statement on branding and really about taking a considered approach to what you're building. We had really taken that approach. Our goal was never to be dependent upon where we're at physically.
Yeah.
It was to be on the quality of the services and talent that we provide. So for us, it hasn't been a big change. It's a little less handshaking than it once was, but it's still largely for us the same in terms of we think and we spend a lot of time communicating. Is that
Right.
fair?
Yeah. So you used to travel a lot,
I did.
and now you don't. Or at
No.
least not right now. You don't.
I don't.
So for you personally, how has that changed, like affected your headspace and your sort of approach to your work? I mean, it's kind of well timed. So you guys were building out this office. I'm sure that was planned well before
It was.
you were grounded. But
It was.
what's it feel like? You've been here You've been here your whole life, and yet you've probably been here more in the last 6 or 9 months than you have since you were a kid.
That's true. I mean, you got to remember, when I was in corporate, I spent probably 35 weeks a year outside the country. And so one of the reasons for starting the business I didn't really mention was that wasn't super healthy.
Right.
And so
Just as a human.
yeah, and I just really wasn't that excited about traveling. So for me personally, I was having to travel a lot, and I still wasn't really ready to be on the road. So for me, this is really great. I have the excuse to not travel. But the flip side is now it's really starting to get in the way of doing things.
Yeah.
And so that's really what we're starting to think about is, as we think about Q4 of this year and into January, I don't know how this is going to play out. You have a better idea than I do. But we are going to have to be getting back out. There are certain things that we're going to have to do and trying to figure out how to do that. But, up to this point, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, so what's the part that you would have done in person, like a factory tour or a direct, like there must be things that are, hard to do remotely.
I mean, you always talk about it, right? Water cooler talk. A lot of stuff gets done outside of the conference room or outside of this screen, right? You and I had a conversation
Right.
down, just for the record, we have our own bar in the office. And so we were communicating down there and talking a little bit, right? And so much gets done outside. The informal channels is where so much business gets done, at least in our business, that it's really stymied. And then I think also, for our, we call our employees teammates here. And so for our teammates that are not here and able to participate in the building and hanging out and talking and playing ping pong or whatever, that's a real problem. And it's hard to get those cultural values expressed. It's hard for people to feel as part of the team. With our strategic clients, it's equally hard to maintain that connectivity and get the flow of what's going on, not just the specifics.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. So I started the first week of class with the Enneagram personality typing and frameworks for trust and building trusting relationships, because my hypothesis is that all of life is just relationships with other people, but success in business really is so driven by, do you have the right people around you, and are you the right person for your customer? Is your business the right entity for your customer? And I think sometimes, particularly those of us who sort of are inclined towards entrepreneurship, can get so focused on like, I have to do it my way, and there has to be sort of this sphere of control and whatever, and that like loosening up and including other people and having people that are better than you at a thing do that thing so that you can go off and do the next thing is sometimes where startups get stuck, because the founder can't, founder syndrome, they can't let go of like the dials of the day-to-day thing. So maybe talk a little bit about like your approach to just people. Like, I mean, a lot of your business is just meeting a guy, right? Like you said it about playing golf at the beginning, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think everything you just said is spot on. In terms of business relationships and people, it's really about trust, right? I mean, my style is vastly different from most salespeople. But I have a particular thing that I do, and people can trust in that. And so, I'm not the guy, but I love that guy.
Yeah.
But it's just not who I am. And so I think in entrepreneurialism in particular, authenticity and trust are really just so important for outside relationships. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that on a Zoom call. It's hard to get that connection and truly look into someone's eye and see who they are. On our internal team and teammates, for me, giving up the control is just not something that I have a problem with. But that's not necessarily true. That really comes from my background in big companies. That's one of the things that you learn. You simply can't progress if you're not able to do that. And so we do struggle with that on different parts of our business, and that's been a real element of our cultural development and evolution, has been getting people to understand you don't have to do everything.
Right.
But everything you do better damn well be awesome.
Right.
And that is a teeter-totter, because you can only do so much awesome. And that almost forces you to let go of the things that aren't most valuable to you and spend your time, which gives us an opportunity to find another resource to plug in.
Yeah.
I don't think that really answered your question.
Well, but it's the right direction of just, I think I certainly, in starting a business, underestimated how much of it would be about people and about hiring the right people. And I wouldn't be necessarily sitting around thinking big strategic thoughts all the time. I would be like on the phone interviewing people a lot of the time. It was growing fast, and I was not ready for the amount of management, like person management, that came with that. But I think it's a thing that a lot of people miss. They're like, oh wait, yes, the customer, and I can't do that by myself, so there are gonna have to be all these people that work with me, and like I have to link them, but not too much, and I have to think they're important but not too important, and I don't know, it was easier for you, but I was like, this is really hard. I don't even really like other people that much.
Right. I think the reality is, on the entrepreneurial side of it, you can really underestimate, as you're mentioning, the management requirement. Most of the people in my sphere when I was starting out, they were entrepreneurs, and either they were young and just starting out, or they had been around for a long time, but they had done 6 or 7 different companies or whatever. And I think that what I would say is in common with them, generally speaking, is they always underestimate how important clients are and the management burden of clients and their own team.
Yeah.
And it's an easy thing to do. It's a very easy thing to do. I did it myself. I mean, you start out working in a coffee shop or whatever it is that you're doing, and it's all on you working to get it to a point, but there's a point of inflection coming. And that point of inflection is going to involve management, to your point. So if you're starting a company, you better either have a partner that really likes doing it, or you better really like doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing, is like, I learned pretty quickly I had to find somebody else who really liked doing it, because I didn't. But I was a clinician and I had my own skill set, and you can't do everything, right? And so it was, I'm a relatively personable person, but when it came to really the day-to-day people management sphere, I was like, wow, I am not good at this. This is not my thing.
What we do, one thing we do here that might be worthwhile just to consider, I'm not saying it's the right way, but a thing to consider, in my last roles in corporate, where I could, because I hate managing people, I largely believe I have a job to do, and everybody who reported me also had a job to do. And managing their lives, professional lives, was not really what I signed up for. And so what I tried to do was develop this concept I have called alignment by numbers, which is really not in a hoity-toity way, but what is it that we are all collectively trying to do, and align the numbers to be the manager.
Yeah, sure.
And that takes a lot of work. And a lot of corporations talk about it, and they don't really do it.
Yeah.
Right? But really, you can really use your metrics if you're specific and well thought out and have the systems to support it.
Right.
They can do the management.
Yeah, I think that's right. If you've got the right KPIs and the right key performance indices and the right corporate culture,
That's right.
business culture. It sounds weird to say corporate if it's a small startup, but culture, and you recruit. I think one of the things that gets hard to do is like chicken and egg stuff. Like if you hire somebody and then you set KPIs, my experience is that doesn't work nearly as well as if the KPIs are there and you hire to them.
That's correct.
And somebody comes in knowing what they're expected to do, and they know if they have a sense of like, can I do that or not on the front end, rather than coming into a job kind of blind, and then these markers get set, and there's this philosophy, some people have this management philosophy of like, well, we're gonna like co-create the indicators because the employee needs to have input into what their performance measures are. That is not my style because like they don't know. They just started. They don't know what they're supposed to be trying to do. And my people felt like that was too big of an ask. Like it was too risky for them to sort of say what they should be expected to do. And I found that it was much better if I just said, here's the line. I, of course, also then had to be responsible when I drew a bad line,
You do.
which I sometimes did, and would have to go back and say, wow, guys, really sorry about that. That was.
But how much better were you if you did the hard work to think about setting those right things, as opposed to taking a 40,000 foot view and not having thought through that? You're so much closer to the P&L.
Yeah.
Everybody in our building, every single person has their own P&L. That's expensive. It's expensive to do. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
But we do that because management is only overhead.
Right.
Every second you spend
right.
managing is only overhead cost. It's a tax. It's an organizational tax. We look at it that way. So all the work that we can do up front, that's correct.
Right.
Or profit generating in this particular case, right? Because not everybody's on the revenue side.
Right.
But the point is, it's only a tax.
Right.
Every time you have to authorize an expense report, every time you have to spend time talking to someone about, oh, well, this was really our objective, and I'm sorry, like all of that creates nothing positive. Doesn't help on the talent side, and it certainly doesn't help with your time utilization and profitability. So if you do that hard work that you did on setting that framework and understanding it down to detail, you're so much further ahead. And then, by the way, you've got a flatter organization by definition.
Well, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Faster decision making, better ability to take advantage of opportunities, your ability to change course because everybody understands the numbers.
Right.
Right? They understand the
they can
impacts.
be like, we do need this.
And you truly get 1,000 eyes looking at it instead of only yours. So for so many reasons, the hard work and time spent that you did, I think pays off in spades over time.
Yeah. Yeah, but of course I had to learn that the hard way. I didn't know that going in. Now I feel like, oh yeah, you should do that. At the time I was like, I don't even know what it, I had the lucky spot of being mentored by someone who hated all humans and screamed at us constantly. And I was like, well, I don't want to do it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, here's not what to do.
Right, absolutely, fear is not actually that productive.
Yeah.
Just ruling by threat.
But to be successful in this world, to your point, this world being the entrepreneurs, the fact of the matter is there's not one of us that makes it through that hasn't come through an ass-kicking contest. Because it's as much attrition.
No, it's a word of attrition for sure.
Right? As it is anything.
Yeah.
You will not make it if you, what is it Patton said? You have a really great plan going into war until the first shot is fired.
Right, yeah.
If you retreat there, you're done.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. All right, anything else you want them to know? The 120 years.
120 years? Wow. Well, I'll only be wrong. I just would say, for me personally, this has been a very rewarding experience. There's a lot of hard work in it. There's a lot of great payoffs that have nothing to do with your ultimate success as a company. And I would just keep a very open posture, no matter what it is that you're trying to work on. I would just keep a very open posture and have a belief in what you're doing, but more have a belief in yourself as opposed to the thing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Be willing to move on the thing as the facts come true. But don't confuse that failure of your product with a failure of you. That to me is the great separator. That to me is what makes this all rewarding in the end, is finding your way through the maze.
Yeah.
For some of you, it'll probably be a straight shot. You'll go out and you'll have a great opportunity to raise some money, and you'll go out and you'll do something big, and that'll be awesome. But I think what's more likely is, for most of you, it'll be more my experience, which is you're going to go out, you're going to have some successes, and you're going to stub your toe. And the reality is you got to look at that as an opportunity for growth. And what is that telling you? And go back and get recentered.
Yeah.
And think it through and take that next big step.
Yeah, I think that's good. Thanks.
It's my pleasure.
Turn the camera off and go to the bar.
All right. Game on. Good luck, guys.
Right.